We've still got a few people kind of trickling in, but I think as time is kind of the essence, we will get started if that's okay. So first of all, welcome to today's event, obviously hosted by Burn Sheehan. For those of you that don't know, Burn Sheehan are a specialist technology recruitment consultancy. We specialize in engineering, product, data, senior hires, and tech ops. So today's event is going to be around building data teams, where we're going to discuss two main areas. They are going to be what it takes to kind of build data teams and what you kind of look for within doing that. And then secondly, once those teams are built, how do we kind of empower and create a culture to enable success? We are very lucky and proud to be joined by four amazing panelists. So in no particular order, we have Mike Seville, who was the head of data science at Farfetch before going on to his current venture as the chief data officer at Paymentsense. We also have Andy Doan, whose data journey has taken him to King.com and also Farfetch before co-founding a new startup venture called Sproutl as their CTO. We also have Sarah Sheridan, a Cambridge graduate who spent time with BT and Liberty Global before joining ClearScore, where she is currently operating as their Director of Insights and Research. And finally, we have Kat Holmes, who formerly was the Director of Data Governance at Travelex and is now the Director of Data Governance at ITV. So kicking things off, obviously, is our first kind of topic. If we just kind of look at what it really takes to build great data teams, what have you as data leaders really done to attract the right kind of talent to your business and to your teams?
Who's going to start?
I'll make a start. So I guess in my experience, the first thing that we've been able to do and I've found consistently effective is the selling of the or the kind of high-level vision about data and the role it plays in the organization, whether that's kind of supporting the organization through business insights and the immense impact that can be derived there, through to much more of the kind of product-based approaches through machine learning and automation. But more broadly, I think, and more effectively beyond the initial discussion that sells that, I think the biggest effect and the biggest impact I've found has been through the network effect and through talent and talent density. So being able to see colleagues and relate to those people, learn from, that in itself has an ongoing network effect, a flywheel effect that continues to attract and retain really great people. People join for other people, and that's been probably my single biggest lesson over the last couple of years of doing this.
I've got a few points to build on that, Mike. You talked about talking about, like, you know, the how you approach data, how you learn, and, like, you know, what your different departments or skill sets might be. I'd even say for ClearScore, it's a level above that, because we are in a position where there is so much competition for talent and retention of talent within our industry, you know, the Facebook and Google war and Apple and all of that kind of thing. And we're a 6-year in business, so a different kind of position to them. And so it's absolutely those factors, but it's the one level higher, which is also our mission. And that's something that really differentiates ClearScore and that we talk about a lot. And so it's not just like being great as a data leader or someone who manipulates or works with data, but it's what you're doing that for. And so it's the mission for ClearScore is to help everyone in the world create understand their finances, feel in control, and be able to feel better about their money, essentially. And so it's not what you're doing as a person within data, but it's what you're doing it for and who you're doing it for. And the way that we do that is be really transparent about who our users are, what their needs are, and actually how what everyone who is working within technology and data is making a difference to those real people's lives. And so it's kind of that part of why people work at ClearScore that really helps to try and differentiate who we are versus all of the other data businesses out there trying to compete for those people too.
I love that, Sarah. And I might flip it a bit and talk about what attracted me to ITV when I had a few other opportunities on the go at the same time. And one big thing for me was around the type of data strategy that was put on the table for me. Everyone's talking about data, everyone's doing data, everyone's investing in data at the moment. But there are different ways that people are going and companies are going about that. And what really attracted me to ITV was Sanjeevan Bala, who's the Chief Data and AI Officer. His vision for data was really, really stood out to me in the market. And I think you can really focus on that side as well. So totally agree that what are we using data for? What's the end goal? But it's also about how we're going to get to that end goal. Certainly, I think can differentiate you.
I think, Kat, that's interesting what you say there. And speaking from my recent experience from bootstrapping a startup, so Sproutl exists to make it really easy for people to do beautiful things in their garden. And Annie, my co-founder, and I were insistent from the beginning that data was going to be core to that vision. But of course, when you're bootstrapping a startup and you don't even have a product yet, you know, talking about data is a bit cart before the horse. Or is it? Because Sarah, I remember something that when we met a few weeks ago to discuss this panel, you said something very, very interesting. At ClearScore, everyone is an analyst. And what was interesting about our hiring strategy at Sproutl is that because we knew data was going to be such a key part of the story, even as we were building the product, we kind of took the attitude, certainly when hiring engineers, that everyone is a data engineer, even if their role isn't actually doing data engineering yet. And what I mean by that is that we wanted to be putting in place the building blocks, and governance is too strong a word, but getting the basics of the data organized right from the beginning. So we hired folks who are quite a generalist skill set, and almost all the certainly back office engineers we brought in have had some data thing going on for them in their story, whether that's data engineering, data science, or analytics, which I think they've been able to bring to bear that skill set already, even though the pressing problem is building the product in the first place.
It's quite interesting that, Andy, and obviously you're hiring the right people to do that. I think with you obviously bootstrapping a startup and obviously doing very well on the data hiring side, how were you able then to kind of find the right people to bring on board, or how were you trying to attract them as a company, as opposed to your big companies that are getting hundreds of applications through from fantastic candidates and stuff along those lines? What did you kind of do, or what did you try and do, which kind of brought about the success of building those teams initially, when perhaps you were still in stealth mode or weren't anywhere near as known as these kind of larger companies?
Yeah, I mean, Nick, this is a great point. And of course, we were in stealth mode for almost over a year, which is kind of tricky because you want to attract amazing talent to a company that nobody knows exists, and you would actually prefer to keep it that way. So you're kind of putting a bit of an uphill struggle in place. But as Mike was saying earlier, I mean, network is the first thing you can go to. So both Annie and I have amazing networks, and myself, my recent professional experience has been in the data space, and that was certainly helpful. Of course, having a great recruitment agency really helps. So people that can tease out those potentially passive candidates who would be up for a crazy startup ride, and who are able to speak for and pitch and sell the vision, again, as Mike was saying earlier, of the company and the product and the consumer side of it, but then how data plays a part in that story. And then I think you have to use what you have to your advantage. As a small company, you can move very quickly. Your process can be very light and fast. You can outmaneuver large organizations who inevitably have a slower process. And I think you can sincerely explain to prospective candidates about the kind of people who are already in the organization. Again, just referencing Mike's first comments there, great people like to work with great people, and people of that mentality who are interested in building something from the beginning, who are interested in the great variety of challenges and problems that inevitably presents themselves when you've got a small group of people trying to do a lot of different things. If you can tap into the folks that share that mindset, and if you're very clear about articulating what it is about that mindset that is valuable to you, then I think there are things that you can use to your advantage, even when stepping back from it would seem like an uphill struggle.
You talk about, Andy, like shared mindset, and so ClearScore being 6 means, I mean, I wasn't here at that initial like bootstrap phase, as you like to call it. I've only been here for 2 years, so I've gone from like 140 people now nearing 250, and but that shared mindset, I think, is so crucial, and like being super transparent about that and trying to communicate that in a way that doesn't feel like it's creating boxes you have to tick, and talking about it in a way that shares our culture without feeling like it's not inclusive has been a really interesting, actually a reason why I joined ClearScore, and a really interesting way of how we also try and attract talent, how we also then help them pass probation and help people perform as a business. We have 8 principals. They're on our careers side. They're also the principals I get reviewed by annually, that we give recognition for. It's like right from before you start to wherever you get to, those principles are the same, and that transparency, kind of like what you're saying about that mindset, I think. Who are we for people to bring to, or maybe is there kind of similarity?
Yeah, and I also think that one of the key things is around diversity and inclusion and belonging. When we met the other week, that was one of the central topics that we had on the agenda from the beginning. But we also agreed that it was such a big topic that we would need a whole separate session for it. And Nick, I think there might be, or Beth, there might be a separate session on diversity and inclusion.
That's right, yeah. In October, we are hosting a panel discussion similar to this, entirely dedicated towards D&I, where we'll talk about that kind of the workplace and promoting that as well. So we'll get that in the link as well to everyone in attendance, so you can see that as well.
Great. I'm just going to give the sort of 10-second version, which is diversity and inclusion becomes part of your strategy for building the right team, or the high-performing team. Diverse and inclusive teams are high-performing teams. The data is clear on that. And just building on what you said, Andy, is there are lots of ways of reaching people from minority groups. I know Tech London Advocates have a bunch of groups. I'm a member of Women in Data. There's Women in Tech. There's Ada's List. And Ada's List is specifically for startups quite often. So I found that being connected to a lot of different groups absolutely helps increase my ability to find a whole different types of people that can come into my team.
And do you find, Kat, from my experience, again, going back to the earlier points around flywheels and network effects, like when you start making some progress, that quickly compounds into further progress?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. There's something about these groups that creates this step effect. When you meet someone and you feel that connection, and then you build that trust, and you're not even looking to hire them at that point. You're just getting involved in people with whom you have something in common, and you don't even need to be from that same minority group. There's a bunch of allies in Women in Data, a bunch of men who are very closely involved with Women in Data, and so it just creates this community that you want to be a part of. And then when you are looking to hire or build your team, or connect people up, if you know of someone else who's hiring, it's right there at your fingertips. It's been absolutely invaluable for me in the last 2 years, being connected.
I think what might be good, Kat, as well, if you could share those with us as well, and we can add that to the send out that we give followers there for everyone that's signed up as well. I think that would be really good. Sarah, I remember you saying one thing when we met up, obviously to discuss this a few weeks ago. It was around that 1 in 4 people in the UK use ClearScore. Is that right?
Yeah, 1 in 4. So we've got in the UK 11 million users. It's another few million in South Africa, and then 1 million in Australia.
I think they're obviously fantastic stats, and we'd hope when people obviously are thinking about ClearScore and stuff like that as well, obviously that's probably one of the drivers, the impact that you were talking about before. What else do you think ClearScore have really done when it's come to building teams, and specifically kind of data teams in such a competitive market? Do you think that's kind of maybe set you aside? Because obviously knowing that you're about to go through hyper growth, but have been constantly growing as well over the last few years, what do you think on top of kind of the usage with kind of the markets, how has kind of had that impact to allow you to do so?
Yeah, it's such an important point of discussion. We're really discussing it a lot at the moment as you go through that period of growth. And this is the first time I've been in a company which is just going to go through some really rapid acceleration. And so, I think two of the points that help to set us apart. One is this belief that you should bring your full self to work. And the other one is about failure. And so if I make it specific to data, and I mean, they're principles that work across, whether in marketing, commercial design, whatever, but if I make it specific to data and tech, we talk about failure really openly. And one of our principles is fail and fix fast. So bugs happen, it happens. It's how you respond to that. Let's call it failure, how you resolve it, how you learn again, and how you actually use that as a way to become even better and even stronger. And so we try and normalize that idea of failure, because especially when you're hiring younger data scientists, analysts, technology people, failure is going to happen. It's actually trying to make it feel like a more normal part of working life, not something to hide away from, because you don't all have to be perfect everything. You have to learn and grow. And so that is something which I think sets us apart, that philosophy on failure. And then, as I said, the other one is bringing your full self to work, which is when I started within data and insight roles, I always got this sense, and maybe this is because I was a woman in a largely corporate male area, is that you open the door to work and your work self, right? And then you close the door on your home self. And actually a big part of building a great team is building trust. And one of the ways that you do that is bring your full self to work. You don't have to hide your personal life and your personality somewhere else. You can be that geek, you can be that extrovert, introvert, whatever you want that to be, as long as it's your full self and it's contributing to ClearScore's mission in the team. And I think there are two things which are particularly important we like to be open about, and we think is something that sets us apart.
Sorry, I mean, you're touching on the broader topic of vulnerability in leadership, for example, and your story there was so interesting to me because it reminded me actually of something I used to do, and I need to remember to do more of, was actually during the hiring process is already an opportunity to show that. So for example, I've occasionally asked candidates maybe the classic question of tell me about a big mistake you've made in your work or some failure. But I would always preface that by sharing one of my own. So, my favorite story of when at a previous employer of mine, unnamed, I accidentally for a moment sort of deleted a production system database and was able to recover it. But just to tell that story, to put the candidate at ease and say, hey, we are all human and we've all made huge mistakes. And it's about what you learned from that, how you recovered it. So I think you can signal that even very early in the process that this is the kind of organization where it's okay to make mistakes. but the important thing is learning from those mistakes and growing.
But you could, yeah, I completely agree. But you can only create that environment. You can talk about failure if you're willing to admit your own. Every
Yes,
person
exactly.
in the company, you know, when we had our company meeting this morning, we had our CEO stand up and talking about the time he failed at X. And it doesn't have to be a long life story, but if you can share it yourself, you're so right. You're creating an environment when someone else can be like, okay, I can actually be honest, rather than, you know, pretend. But,
Totally
yeah.
agree with this. I recently started in my all hands meetings. We had for the first time we got everyone in the office post COVID, and we did a catch up on everything that's going on. And my very first slide was, these are all the things done wrong over the last 6 months. It's quite a humbling thing to stand up at night, sit there and think about, and then come up and talk about it. But I think it set the right tone for the rest of the afternoon. A lot of these people were meeting each other for the first time. It was really an opportunity to set the culture in a new environment, and I think it had the desired effect. Certainly the feedback I got on that was good. So.
You know that if you're going to say the words vulnerability and leadership, that I'm immediately going to talk about Brené Brown. So very briefly, for those who aren't connected to me on LinkedIn, because I talk about her all the time, Brené Brown is the world's foremost researcher and speaker on leadership. And she has this fantastic podcast called Dare to Lead. She did this 2-part special on daring versus armored leadership. And I encourage anyone on the call today to check it out. It's on all good podcast channels. She says that the armor we throw up when we're under stress at work is the greatest barrier to daring leadership, because it splits us off from the most important part of ourselves that we need to be a good leader, which is our heart. And all three of you have absolutely, given real life examples from that. There is this complete myth in organizations that if you sever the heart, then you're more productive, efficient, and easier to manage. But actually the reverse is true. Because if you're rewarding perfectionism and emotional stoicism, that imprisons the heart, and doing that kills courage, which then kills innovation. So when we allow emotion and vulnerability, there's all of these new worlds that can open to us as data teams. We're better at decision making. We've got more creative thinking. We're more resilient. It's really good for team building. Again, like those examples all three of you just gave. And trust, as Sarah said. And a really key word that's been coming up a lot in the leadership stuff I've been looking at is this concept of psychological safety. So again, check that out, because as data leaders, we must be at the forefront of innovation and creative thinking in an organization. So really, what I'm basically saying is that our success as data leaders absolutely depends on us.
I think it's absolutely fantastic that everyone has been so open about the vulnerabilities, and maybe to kind of put you all on the spot a little bit, if that's all right. It's kind of obviously, Andy, you mentioned the mistake that you made for a previous employer, etc., as well, and illustrating that kind of vulnerability to people during the interview process. Do you think in the past, and you might not all have examples here, but when it comes to kind of bringing on talent, specifically data talent, which again is in such high demand, do you think there's stuff that maybe you've noticed your company doing that perhaps needed to change, or is maybe being at fault for not hiring to the volume or the standard perhaps that you required? Is there any kind of experiences you can draw upon there that maybe you've learned from and now kind of obviously changing and adapting?
Yeah, I mean, I have a few examples. And again, this is kind of couched in the context of working for a company that suddenly is going through, a really challenging time, as we all did last year, but now this period of acceleration. I think one of them, which we're so much better at now, but maybe we weren't as at the beginning, is when someone comes in for a role and you think you're not quite right for that role or that level, is thinking about where else they could fit. And what just the other week, I had a message saying, look, we've met this great candidate. They want this role, but we actually think their experience is in this role. Do you think we could offer them a job where actually they could train up in that role, or they could, so it's like thinking more holistically about the individual maybe they're not exactly right, but there's something in them which is really valuable. And I think now we're much, much better at that. And I'm like, it's great that it's not just a, you know, it's not as boxy, and there's more conversations around that. I think that comes with the type of organization you're in and whether you have the flexibility. If you're going through growth, there's like more opportunity for it, because I'm sure lots of people would be willing to do that. It's whether they're able to, and I suppose you have to have that willing and ability to come together to be able to, but that would definitely be one.
Totally agree with that, Sarah. I always talk a lot about hiring people rather than roles. And I think, you know, Andy, when you're talking about starting a team, either a small team or in a new company, it's one of the single best things you have at your disposal is that you don't have any overheads around where somebody needs to go. Usually, anyone with the right kind of culture and values and capability is useful regardless of where they go. So finding it right for them is often so effective.
Yeah, exactly. And their connection with the mission and what you're all trying to achieve. And I think especially in a small company where you've just got that existential necessity that everyone throws their hand on whatever needs doing. I've always favored for broader, more generalist skill sets, apart from obviously there are certain specialist roles where you have to have a very deep spike in a certain area. Because I think, to Sarah's point, that's that fungibility and that ability for folks to move around an organization, and certainly as I think the workplace and the workforce is demanding more flexibility to be able to support people's career progression, to move around the business, and that they've got a skill set that means they can turn their hand to a broader array of problems. I think that actually is very powerful, both for the individual and for the organization, and gives flexibility on both parts. So yeah, I completely agree the importance of that.
I think a mistake one of my former organisations made, and which I have generally seen more of here in the UK than in Australia, my original country, is not holding people accountable. Holding people accountable is actually compassionate leadership. It might not seem it is, but again, there's a wealth of research on this. Because if you're not setting clear expectations with them, and that setting process can actually be very collaborative and ought to be very collaborative, but setting these clear expectations and then holding them accountable to it, if you're not doing that, you can't do things like criticize them if they're not meeting those expectations. Again, focusing on the failure aspect instead of the growth aspect. So I guess in summary, what I'm saying is accountability is a really important part of that. And I haven't seen, sometimes I've seen that not being a feature of a company's culture, and it's really critical. And you can do it in your data team, even if the broader company doesn't have it.
Have you ever read the book Extreme Ownership?
No.
Okay. Maybe, I mean, not as inspiring and linguistic as Brené Brown, but it is about the principles of accountability and ownership and how you create like that really clear set of like, you know, even if things don't go, if this thing goes wrong, I own it. What am I going to do? I'm not going to wait for someone else to respond. And so that is like helping part of that culture, I think, of accountability as well. Of this is what I need to deliver. If I'm not delivering this, I need to have a conversation. Like it's kind of in a similar topic.
I love it. And psychological safety in your data team makes it easier for everyone to be accountable for themselves. Yeah, the two are linked.
I think that's probably a good bridge for us, actually, speaking about culture, to potentially move on to the second section of kind of what we want to cover here today, which is obviously about empowering data teams. And once we've kind of built those teams and got those teams in place, what is it that you as leaders are potentially doing to maybe establish the right culture, if there is such a thing as the right culture? Obviously, it's very kind of subjective there, but also kind of empower people within that as well. Do you have kind of examples of what, you know, you as leaders bring to the table to enable that?
So I think there's absolutely not a right culture, but there is the right culture for your organization and your set of problems and what you're trying to achieve. And I think, Kat, it might have been you earlier in the call, forgive me, it was someone else, talking about trust. And for me, having established, as we talked about, the hiring process and skill sets and so on, absolutely the next step is trust. I think that has to be the cornerstone. So for us as leaders to deeply and profoundly trust our teams and to make sure they are fully empowered to, again, Sarah, picking up your point around ownership, accountability, with that in mind, they are then empowered to step up and, you know, do their very best work, and that we support and trust them sincerely around that. And I think this, for me personally, has been amplified through the COVID period and lockdowns and the increase in remote work. And yeah, this is not my original quote, but we say it quite a lot at Sproutl, is, you know, if you're not trusting your teams, then why are they working for you in the first place? Because, you know, especially when we're with remote, there's, you know, you can't be worrying about what people are doing and policing them for practical reasons. But, you know, culturally, for me, that's never a question anyway. So for me, everything else like builds off of trust as the first plank.
Big component of that as well, Andy, I found, is the feedback and transparency elements of this as well, in terms of building trust. If the team is collectively honestly sharing useful feedback to each other about performance or issues that might be arising within themselves, and they can rely on people to either suggest improvements, and it's coming from the right place, that in turn kind of really reinforces that. It's something we're adopting as best we can, especially in this COVID world. Is trickier, and there's a natural, I think, British kind of tendency to shy away from some of the more candid, let's say, feedback. But we certainly found that really useful as well for helping embed that.
I'm going to be vulnerable for a second and talk about my challenge as a leader, which is exactly what the two of you talked about, which is letting go. So I have really high standards, and I have struggled in the past to let my team fail, because I have seen that as a failure on me, which means that I'm not good enough, which means the usual stuff. And so when I was thinking about, while you were talking, Andy, just now, I was thinking about a culture is built from you looking at your strengths and then looking at the areas where you've got a lot of growth to do and focusing on those growth areas, because your strengths are naturally going to just infuse into that culture anyway. And so yeah, when you were talking about trust in teams, I've worked really hard on that aspect, and I'll never be as good as a really laid back person who's just really good at letting go. But I know that if I can see all of these things that make for a high performing team, and continually doing that. And again, Mike, just feeding off you, transparency is everything. So.
I think just to pick that a little more there, Kat, is reminds me of earlier on in the conversation we were talking about, you know, vulnerability in leadership. And I think that's something we would agree can be role modeled by leaders in the organization. I think the same is true for all these points as well, is making sure that as leaders we are walking the walk on these topics. So, you know, Mike, you mentioned around feedback between Annie and I, you know, my co-founder, we make sure that we give each other feedback privately, but we also like to do that in front of people, in front of the team, and you know, respectfully, of course, challenge each other to signal to the team that it's okay. You know, anyone can speak to anyone on any topic. I think making sure we're doing that publicly and role modeling that in front of people to signal those things very strongly is also super powerful.
I hear you on both of those points. I mean, and kind of to that point of vulnerability, I find conflict quite difficult. So I get, you know, my tendency is to be like, shit, I said something, sorry. If someone disagrees with me, I'm like, I must be wrong. I'm going to back down and not share my point of view. But, you know, in the context of that question on culture, one of our principles is we fight. It doesn't mean we physically fight, but it means that we share our opinions, we debate and discuss, and there'll be a point where you naturally might disagree and commit. But actually, of like being really transparent, just as you were saying, Andy, on disagreeing in front of other people and actually saying this is normal, this is okay. We're still great colleagues, but that's it. In my own personal experience in the past couple of years, it's made me feel more comfortable in being able to have those types of conversations without taking it really personally and starting to kind of veer down the imposter syndrome route. So yeah, like role modeling it is really, really important for other people, and whatever function you work in, that principle is still true, that you can disagree and commit on something.
Actually, so I'm super curious by that, because it's a delightfully provocative statement to have. I mean, I'm just wondering how you kind of as an organization frame that, and what guardrails do you put around that, because obviously that statement could be taken in a bazillion different ways.
Yeah, and it's something that people debate, and people have different opinions on the principle itself, but fundamentally it's about, we fight for our users. What do we think is the best outcome for our users? So we're user first in everything we do. And if I think the outcome might be negative to users, it's my responsibility to share that opinion. Someone else might have a different opinion, and then somehow we'll get to the right one. But that idea of, it's basically around challenging each other, because otherwise, if you don't create an environment of trust where you can challenge each other, and as Kat said, be vulnerable, you'll never come up with new stuff and new ways of doing things. You always just default to the person maybe the most senior or the most experienced. But you can only have that debate, that challenge, principled under this term, like we fight, if you know it's for the right reasons, which is like the user outcome. And if you do it in a way where you can also step back and say, okay, I disagree, but that's cool. You know, I can see why you're doing that, and that's the route we're going to go down.
I love that, because actually what you're fighting for is a greater principle. So you're leaving your ego at the door. You're not fighting for your ego or your position. You're fighting for the best outcome. And I love that. I really love that. Have you noticed how in the last 30 minutes that almost all of our conversation has been about the humanity of data teams? And it's not about, you know, building the best machine learning models and having the best dashboarding, and clearly those things are important, but we've almost exclusively talked about the human side.
Certainly the technology is a lot easier than the people, so that's probably why we're spending it.
Do you think though it's also because that's the hygiene factor, because we know we're in such a competitive market with such a, you know, there's such an availability of how to learn and how to upskill and, you know, how to use data? It's like they're the hygiene factors when you're talking about how to hire and all of that stuff. It's what you do with that skill set and how you help people achieve what they want to achieve that like differentiates your company, maybe.
Absolutely. And just a really concrete example from the data science team is a data scientist can work on a business problem statement and come up with a model that resolves that business problem statement. And that can cost, you know, 6 months and, you know, a couple of $100,000 and so on. But if that business problem statement is not the one that is the most critical for the organization's values and goals that year, then you're failing as a data team. So whilst you are very successful in that in that model and that predictive analysis, you're not a successful data team. And the difference between the two, again, is the leadership, the people, the humanity, the communication, the business acumen, all of those things.
Indeed, and so often as well, the humanity aspect of it, getting to understand stakeholders, getting to understand the customer, the business, depends on that kind of empathy that we're all talking about in other areas. It's almost impossible to bridge that gap, and that's in place.
One of the things that perhaps is come up quite a bit that I've found is it's not necessarily just the leaders that have trouble letting go, like you said, Kat, for example. There's obviously team members similarly have that as well. And one thing that you probably all notice throughout your careers is that at times the demand on data teams seems to be so much that almost there is kind of endless tasks and endless stuff to do and kind of requirements probably from above to do more and more. How do you kind of bridge that with your teams to ensure that actually, yes, they're doing great work, they're doing the right amount of work, but they're perhaps not doing too much so that they're still happy within the company, they're still feeling empowered, that type of thing? How do you kind of manage that?
We've been going through this journey quite a lot recently, even as a startup, as a small growing company. And I think for me, the overriding theme is around focus, and focus is as much about saying no to the things you're not going to do as it is saying yes to the things you are going to do. And when you actively and explicitly say no to things, that forces the necessary conversations in the business to flush through the implications of that and make sure that everyone is comfortable with it. And I'm going to forget the source of this, but I think Annie first mentioned it, was being, if you're clear on the things you have to be really good at, the flip side of that is also then being clear on the things you're going to be, as you got it, proudly crap at, and label them and say, hey guys, we're aware of that thing over there. It's going to be a bit crap for a while, but that's all okay. No one has to get guilty on it. It's because we've prioritized this thing over there. And it's a constant battle because new stuff's coming in all the time, and there's a drive to get things done. But I think really getting that discipline early of being very explicit on these two pieces is really powerful.
Yeah, the keyword's no. It's as simple as that. At ITV, we're going through that journey right now. As we invest significant sums in a new data strategy, we then have had to negotiate with the business about their existing projects. We can't do both. We can't do BAU and new. So it's been a hard conversation. And you can see it from the business side, because they now have to wait for the new, which is going to be utterly amazing and incredible. But they've got KPIs to meet this quarter. What's going to happen with them? So it's not easy, but it starts with the conversation. Andy, you're right.
Just going a bit further, I think there's often that 80-20 principle at play as well. Sometimes the piece of work, most of the value comes from not too much, whether it's a simplistic implementation of an ML model rather than using a rule base instead, or a simple piece of analysis that gets most of the way where you need to go. And then actually we could invest another 6 months doing the other 20% and getting to perfection. And I think having teams that are pragmatic, let's say, about how they approach problems and not taking on too much or not shooting for the stars from the first version is also a big part of it. I think absolutely saying no is vital, but then even within saying no, there's still those other things that you're saying yes to that could be a lot easier than they need to be.
Like grades of no, you mean?
I think it's important for us to potentially move on to the Q&A soon. Obviously, just looking at the clock, and what I'd potentially suggest is that if anyone has any questions, obviously please do use that function so we can get a couple of things together. And maybe one last point, if it's okay, and I'm a little bit worried about opening a can of worms here, but there was something that we did discuss when we met a few weeks ago, was that obviously this cultural fit is so important, but how do you establish that cultural fit within teams without being exclusionary? Obviously fitting in and stuff like that as well. It's something I'd really like us to cover off, but similarly, if we could do it within 6 or 7 minutes, that would be great, so we can get a couple of questions in. So good luck with that, I think. But yeah, let's see how we manage.
Yeah, I can start that off. It's kind of related to the point I started at the beginning, which was about behavioral principles. So it's rooted in behaviors, it's things you can evidence and actually demonstrate. And those behavioral principles are 100% transparent. You know, anyone could look ours up right now. And they're what we hire by, what we do performance by, what we do recognition and celebration by. And actually, those principles work across every single person at ClearScore. no matter what function or, you know, level you are. It's just that if you're in tech, you might veer towards 3 of the 8 more. They might, you know, be amplified in some way, and there might be an expectation around those. So I don't worry about that exclusionary thing, because I think it's a kind of separate topic, creating a more diverse, inclusive team, but also that sense of belonging. And that's such an important word that, Kat, you mentioned earlier, belonging, measuring belonging amongst your team, seeing how it changes over time. And we do that, and we see where we think we're going well and where we're not. You know, it's not just about hiring people that look different into your company. It's then about creating an environment where everyone can belong and perform. But those principles underlie absolutely everything, and they're rooted in behaviors.
I'd agree with that completely, Sarah. I think it's about being concrete about what culture means, what the behaviours and the tendencies and the values of cultural fit, and then ensuring that the process, the panel of people that are part of the onboarding is diverse enough that you're measuring that from all angles and from different perspectives, and in turn, rather than it being a select group within one part of the organisation, for example, and you get that reinforcement to an potential opportunity for exclusion.
Mm. So I generally subscribe to the view that culture should be distinctive. You should be able to articulate and describe your culture in distinctive enough terms that, and divisive is perhaps too strong a word, but people can actually opt in to, yes, that is a culture I identify with. And I was actually chatting with a former colleague of mine recently around this, how do you reconcile that with inclusivity? But you know, I think we could all agree, if your culture is defined by a love of high performance and so on, then making that inclusive doesn't necessarily mean, you know, we're going to dilute our idea of high performance to make it more inclusive for people that don't perform well. That's obviously not the intention. But yeah, I think these two worlds can be reconciled, and I think you both picked up sort of the themes of how that can be achieved just there. I'm curious, Kat, whether you had some thoughts on this, because this is very much your specialty.
I was just going to type drop mic into the chat session after what Sarah said. Nothing to add. Yeah, maybe a slight PS. There was a diversity and inclusion manager at Travelex, my former, and he was talking about how the terms cultural fit in a job description and the hiring process are exclusionary. And therefore you have to be very careful. So that's my only PS, but I think all 3 of you have given really great examples of how to avoid that.
I think, if you don't mind, everyone, if we could move on to a couple of questions, just so we can get a couple of things answered from the audience. So first of all, have you ever stumbled across signs that perhaps the team you've built isn't performing as best you'd like? And if so, have you sought about correcting it?
One of my mentors said, it's not just about hiring well, it's about firing well. And we've spoken a lot in the last 30, 40 minutes around creating a great data team. And if there's a lot of key points there around doing that, and if you're doing that, you want to hope that you don't, that you're not facing that issue on a constant basis. Because if you are, there's a leadership question there. But absolutely, I think that that has to be part of the equation at some point.
I'd agree with that. I'd say effective diagnosis of the issue is first and foremost vital. I think getting to the root cause of where the issues are arising, personalities, culture, values are not what we thought they were. You know, we spent too much about that in this discussion, but you know, it's easy sometimes for personalities, what have you, to mask, let's say, underlying issues. It could be wider organizational pressures, direction, leadership. There's so many different variables that kind of constitute underperformance in a team. And I think, firstly, taking a time and understanding what's happening and effective dialogue with the team is vital. And you know, hopefully, if we've done what we've been saying today and we built that trust, we can have honest conversations about what that is. And then, yeah, I agree with you completely, Kat. It's never the preferred option, but yeah, being willing to take necessary steps towards correcting it can include those kind of things, or it could include changes in priority or org structure or whatever. All those things constitute.
Another one here, which quite interesting actually, given the size difference in organizations that you all come from. Do you set strict interview processes for all candidates, or if there's a standout candidate, then are you flexible?
In terms of how you interview them or what role they join for?
I think potentially how you interview them. I think maybe processes, if you shorten it, lengthen it.
Okay.
And obviously, I'm assuming kind of taking bias out of it, of course, but can you be
yeah, I mean,
flexible?
I've actually had recent experience of that. There's some obvious ones. You have to be aware of any ability differences, be they like cognitive or physical. So obviously you have to tailor that interview process. If someone suffers or has an experience of a certain cognitive difference, then you have to maybe change the style in which you ask questions. You need to be more literal or not, or prep time and that kind of thing for interview. But those things aside, we try and be really consistent across functions, because at the end of the day, we're all people that, you know, are managed and have the same expectations across functions. So like for specific instances, absolutely you have to tailor it, but generally we actually try and be consistent, but always improving. So consistent, but also flexible enough to say, we've learned from this tech team, this day of interviewing works way better, or we've learned from this team, this style of interviewing is working better. But that's all down to the people in talent team to really help and drive forward. And that sense of like always learning is definitely there.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, I think actually, I would. Sorry, Nick. Just to add briefly on that. I think
afterwards anyway.
The questioner said standout candidates. I'm assuming that would mean that they were obviously very good or something like that. And if that's the case, I still think Sarah's point is absolutely true, that you have to apply consistency, because immediately would be the question, well, by whose yardstick are they significantly better? And you never know what stuff might be unearthed by your colleagues who are interviewing. And if you do fast track someone or take shortcuts to bring them into the business, and then for whatever reason it doesn't work out, you know, that could be very damaging. Because you need buy-in from everyone in that process to also make sure the individual is well supported. So yeah, I certainly, flexibility in terms of practical things or schedule, I think absolutely. But in terms of process, I would be very reluctant to change that.
That's exactly what I was going to kind of come to after that, Andy. I think you and Mike kind of spoke a lot at the beginning about obviously utilizing your network and stuff like that as well. So I think it's great that obviously you highlight that, even if you are utilizing your network simply by your yardstick, they're fantastic, but you're giving the unbiased approach there, that actually they still need to go through that consistent approach and stuff, which is fantastic.
And just a quick PS, if I can, Nick, is
yeah, of course, please.
Obviously eliminating you cannot underestimate the amount of unconscious bias you have as a hiring manager and your teams. You must be very careful with unconscious bias. We naturally want to hire people that look sound and have a personality like us. We do.
I'm going to contradict the consensus so far. So not to contradict the point there particularly, Kat, you're absolutely correct. But there's a point in any process where you go from verification to attraction. And whilst I concur completely that the verification process, consistent, versed in and whatnot, is all absolutely vital, when you're moving into the attraction part, often a custom approach becomes absolutely necessary. It's bringing in the right personality who's going to gel with the person you're trying to attract, if they've got shared interests, or maybe it's somebody that could be a mentor for that individual when they come into the business, or maybe it's in our case, it's the founders of the business. Usually they're incredibly persuasive. and often, especially for my most senior hires, I want to make sure that they're bought in as well at that level. And so it can be a whole multitude of things. And I think at that point, when you're trying to close a candidate, like the parameters start to shift, and you're trying to understand, based on the conversations you've already had and all the signals you've had around what they value, that's when it becomes really imperative to be quite flexible, I
think what we'll do one more question before we run out of time, but also just quickly, for the audience, there will be a poll that will pop up at some point on your screen. Basically just a little bit of feedback from the event, so that the ones we do in the future, we can obviously continually improve, and what you like we can continue to do, etc. and stuff as well. But the final one, and I think it is probably quite topical because it has come up so much. What's the most important thing you all look for in your, in inverted commas, cultures?
I could start on that. I think if, so we haven't formally distilled into single words our kind of culture and values since we are just getting started. But I think if I had to pull one out myself, it would just say it would be genuine curiosity for the business, curiosity to learn. I think that's, you know, especially as a startup, is super powerful and carries you over all the ups and downs that you inevitably experience on the way. So if I had to pick one, that would probably be my favorite so far.
I think we can probably hold it there because we are literally just about on the hour. So look, thank you so much, everyone. Really appreciate you taking the time. And of course, thank you to everyone that's joined. I hope you've all learned something, and I certainly have. And obviously what we will do following this is we'll get the recording out for everyone that's signed up. We will get everything that we've spoken about within this as well. We'll get the links to our event, or the date that we're looking to do, the D&I event that we mentioned briefly, and Kat's groups as well, which you mentioned, which I think is really important to share across this as well. So thanks, everyone. Really appreciate it. And yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Pleasure.
everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.